ACP Europe Underground. My name is Dr. Rick Brescia. I'm going to be traveling with you through the next 5 pages that you guys are looking at here in Stephenson's, pages 25 through 30. I've included my email on this first slide here. I am on the faculty at Sherman with Dr. Decken. I've gone through the ACP program at Sherman, and I've also gone through the Philosophy Diplomate program too as well. So I've included the email. If you have any questions or you'd like to email me back, it's there on this first slide, rbrescia@sherman.edu, and we're going to be checking out Stephenson's here. I think it's amazing what you guys are doing, your continuing education that you're doing together when you're looking at dissecting Stephenson's and how you're going to go about reading this and meeting as a group. I think that's amazing, and I wish there was a lot more groups in the U.S. that would get together and do this too as well. We have a small little group here at the school that meets once a week, and we talk about try to talk about philosophy and things like that. Sometimes school business gets in the way, but I think it's really great what you guys are doing, and I hope you continue to do it, and I hope that I can bring some light to some things that we're looking at in these next 5 pages here, and that you guys enjoy this and you continue to push forward and keep on keeping on, as BJ would say. So let's dive in and look at these 5 pages here. So page 25, the first article that's officially started on that page, is the 5th step of the normal complete cycle, and that's the brain cell. This is article 57, and we're looking at the brain cell. So Stephenson says in the bold print on page 25 here with the brain cell that it's an organ used by innate intelligence for the assembly of forces, a place where thoughts are made, forces are assembled. He calls it the clearinghouse for coordination. As the brain is an organ, so is the brain cell. The brain cell is a smaller unit of that brain. It's the workshop of innate intelligence, and metabolically, it's the tissue cell requiring mental impulses, blood, and serum, just like any other cell would be in the body. Okay, so when we're looking at this and we're looking at the brain cell, he goes on to explain here all the different anatomical structures of a brain cell that makes it different from a regular tissue cell, like your dendrites and your axons. The nucleus and things like that. But one of the things that I want you to pay specifically attention to is when we get on to page 26, where he gets into, at the top of page 26, he talks about how the white matter, which is the axons, pass from cell to cell, lobe to lobe, hemisphere to hemisphere, from brain to brain, and from there to the spinal cord. So he also talks here about how it offers perfect intercommunication between all the brain cells and between the brain cells and the body cells. So this white matter, these axons that are going to be coming down and forming what we're going to look at here in a little bit as the spinal cord, basically these axons are what forms the rest of our CNS, coming out down through the spinal cord and then out through our peripheral nerves, and he talks about how all of that is interlinked with perfect communication. Okay, the axons are the most important parts of the cells, he says in this paragraph, and then if you move on to the next paragraph on page 26, they pass from brain cells through the foramen magnum. They form a cylindrical object known as the spinal cord, and from there they pass on to the spinal nerves, which branch and ramify to all the parts of the body. I was talking with Dr. Decken about this tissue cell here, brain cell combination, how Stephenson's does it, and he had mentioned that the brain cell and the tissue cell are completely different. But we have to remember that the brain cell is tissue cell. Maybe we could refer to it as a special form of tissue cell. Okay, this, if we were to link it into like chiropractic context, he talks about how this is the clearinghouse or innate's workshop. This essentially, if you were looking at it in one way that I would like to look at it, is in terms of your office and when you're running your office, okay? The brain cell is going to be your office itself, and you are the innate intelligence of that office. So it's all of your ideas, your concepts, your things that you're going to be adapting and doing differently, changes that you're going to be making. You're constantly going to be monitoring your office. You're going to be taking metrics. You're going to be looking at your visits, you're going to be looking at your collections, you're going to be looking at your services, you're going to be looking at all of these things and evaluating those, and then you're going to be adapting that office and making changes to it to make it more efficient, to make the flow better, to be able to serve more people and do the things to your highest, fullest capacity. So the brain cell is Nate's office, much like your chiropractic office. The people coming into that office and the services that you're going to be providing to them could be much like looking at them being the tissue cell. So your actions, your office is the brain cell, and it's going to be acting on those people that come in to your office, and you're going to be reacting to that, okay? I think a thing that's cool that he talks about in here too is that the brain cell makes thoughts and it builds forces, okay? So there's two things going on in the brain cell. Now, a lot of what he talks about here in Article 57 is just much of the anatomy of the brain cell. He doesn't really get into all the functional components of it and the things that it does. He basically, Stevenson's just starts to introduce us to these things. He talks about here, right before we get into the next step of the cycle, the bottom second to the last paragraph there on page 26, he talks about how the nervous tissue in the brain and spinal cord is called the central nervous system. Anatomically, the spinal nerves and visceral system is called the peripheral nervous system. Okay, chiropractic is inclined to regard all nervous tissue outside the cranium as peripheral system, even those portions of the cranial nerves which supply tissue cells with mental impulses. So I think one of the things that's cool that he's looking at here is he's breaking down about how we have the CNS and the PNS that we all learned about in order to be able to get through school and all the anatomy classes that we sat through and we looked at. But how amazing would it have been if somebody that was in those classes teaching those subjects had really understood Stevenson's and could take that philosophy and relate it back. And some of you that may be older practitioners, you may have had some practicing chiropractors that taught you that information. Unfortunately, I didn't. I'm younger in the profession. I graduated from Palmer Davenport in 2008. So I was taught anatomy by an anatomist, someone that maybe fully didn't understand chiropractic. They didn't understand what they're looking at here in Stevenson's, especially in the freshman text. As you guys go through and you look at your sophomore, your junior, and your senior text, a lot of times for me it was much easier for me to understand some of the concepts that Stevenson's was talking about in this freshman text by going on and looking later on at actually going and reading the junior or the senior text first and then coming back and looking at this, because in those later texts he really dives deep into looking at what all of these components of this normal complete cycle are and the things that they have, the actions that they have in that cycle and what it is that they're going to be doing. Okay, the workshop of innate intelligence, I think that's awesome, and I think that was a pretty good metaphor that I gave you guys. Metabolically, it's a tissue cell requiring mental impulses, blood, and serum. So looking at that too, the brain cell is constantly adapting just like any other tissue cell in our body would be. One of the misconceptions I had when I first started learning and looking at this is I thought that the brain cell or the brain itself is where innate intelligence was really housed. And you have to understand that innate intelligence is above that. It's above that brain cell. It's above the innate brain. Innate intelligence is like this umbrella over the whole entire body, covering it and controlling it. And all of the parts inside the body, which would your brain be included, are going to be controlled and under the influence and adaptation and mental impulse changes that are going to be coming down from that innate intelligence. So I think that's something to really pay attention to and focus on as well when you're diving in, especially later on in the text, getting into the brain cell and the steps of this normal complete cycle here. The next step of the normal complete cycle is transformation. This is Article 58 on page 26. That's the sixth step of the normal complete cycle. And in the bold print here on this page, you can see Stevenson's talks about how these are changing mental force to a specific unit. We're going to get into what that specific unit is called. Changing force from the mental realm to material realm. Making phorons usable in the tissue cell, making a force out of thought so that it can be physical enough to get a grip on matter. On 28, he talks about its changing thought to force so that it can be expressed in forms physical. Concentrating or collecting mental forces into specific forms so that they will have a definite aim or purpose. And the first line of this next paragraph, one of the hardest processes of the cycle to understand is transformation. So he's talking here about something, basically when we look at this slide that I have in front of you, we're going from the mental realm to the material realm. We're talking about something completely abstract here trying to get it more concrete to where it's going to have actions on the body. Okay, the last line of that paragraph here, it talks about how basically this whole paragraph, he talks about how if you were going to be writing something down on a piece of paper, you can have the paper on your desk, you can have that pencil there, you can have your hand there, and you could actually probably have your hand holding that pencil, but unless there's some sort of instruction given to your hand to go and actually write something down on that piece of paper, nothing will be transferred onto that piece of paper. There will nothing will absolutely happen unless there is some sort of will to move the hand and move the muscles and move them in a specific coordinated way for you to be able to write that down. So the last sentence here, he talks about how thought moved matter, but not until a definite set of thoughts were made specific enough to accomplish that end. So unless we have, the matter is not going to move, matter is not going to be acted on unless it is given some sort of action to do so. And these thoughts are going to be those action plans that we later on see what that's going to be called. The first sentence of the next paragraph here, he says, innate assembles universal forces in the brain cell so that they are in the form of thoughts. So this is totally the abstract realm here. This would be like if you, like let's look at building out your office. Okay, when you maybe opened up your office, it may have been what they would call a vanilla box, where there was 4 walls and maybe a bathroom in it and there was nothing else. It was a total blank, clean slate, okay? Or like the Sistine Chapel before it was painted. It was just a ceiling. There was nothing there. And there was a thought that that artist, I believe it was Michelangelo, I could be wrong, don't quote me on that, had in his head that was like, okay, look, this is what I have in my head, this is what I'm going to do, but until that thought is turned into action, none of that would have been done. So when you had thoughts about what your office would look like, how people would flow, where your front desk would be, where your tables would be, if you're going to do x-rays, all your patient education, the things you're going to have on your wall, the colors, the people in the office, the people that are going to be your staff, all of those things are abstract thoughts that were in your head, and until they were put down on the paper and actually had action taken with them, nothing would have been done until there was those steps taken. So that's kind of the context of what transformation is here. It's taking things from the mental or thought realm and moving them into where they're going to, you'll see in the next step here, they're going to be formed into mental impulses, which is actually actions that are going to be sent, messages, directions that are going to be sent to those tissue cells to accomplish those goals. The next sentence, or after the universal forces, he talks about how these forces are in a non-specific state called phorons. Phorons would be the forces inside the head, the thought process before they're turned into a mental impulse. He talks about here how they're completely, totally abstract. The most powerful creations in nature, being abstract, they have no connection with matter. So there's no connection from these thoughts to the matter until transformation occurs. That's one thing that we really need to focus on. Transformation is a process of so changing these phorons that they become a form of energy, which does affect matter. So we're going, again, from the phoron to moving to the mental impulse. It's a transformation from a thought, moving it into being a mental impulse where it's going to be sent to that cell, and tissue cell, and an action is going to be carried out. Okay, he goes on here to talk about how transformation is the link, much like a magnet would move steel. He talks about how there's a force between the magnet and steel, and they don't touch one another, but yet that magnet is pulling on that, much like gravity is pulling on us. We know that there's a force between us and the earth, which would be gravity. We can't see it. They can measure it by other means. They can't measure gravity exactly by itself, but they can have an object be pulled towards the earth to where they can measure it, some sort of physical object. Much like we, as chiropractors, can't measure the mental impulse itself, we have other things that we may do to try to see what or how the body is acting, coordinating, functioning, things that it's doing if subluxation is present or not present, which would be after the normal complete cycle. Subluxation would come in when the body can't adapt to either thoughts, traumas, or DD would say autosuggestion. Did I say thoughts, traumas, or toxins? Thoughts and autosuggestion would be much the same thing. Okay, Dee Dee would have said autosuggestion, not thoughts. So we know that there is a force acting on us in gravity, but we can't actually physically measure that force. We have to have some other tool to do it. So just like we would evaluate for subluxation, you would have other tools. You might use skin temperature analysis, whether it's in a pattern form or a break analysis, like myself being a Gonstead practitioner would do. You may use leg checks. You may use muscle palpation, like we teach here at Sherman. So there's an innate intelligence inside the body, a wisdom that's going to be looking to correct those vertebrae. If the spinous is rotated to the right, the muscles on the left side of the spine are going to be trying to pull harder. There's going to be an increased tone on those muscles on the left side as compared to the right, and the body's going to be trying to work to correct that subluxation. The innate intelligence is going to be using the muscles of the body to try to correct that subluxation. There's going to be an increased tone. These are the things that we're going to be looking for and evaluating as a chiropractor, but we're using those physical things to try to measure something that's not totally physical, which would be the mental impulse. And then the last sentence here, the last paragraph before we move into the getting to the mental impulse, he talks about when phorons have been transformed, they are units called mental impulses. So once transformation occurs, it moves into the mental impulse. The force is now outside the mental realm. So he's talking about going from total thought process transformation occurs, we're out of the mental realm and we're moving almost into the, I would argue that we're moving almost into the physical realm. He would pretty much say that we are in a physical form, but with not having something able to be measured, the mental impulse is a vitalistic component of still this normal complete cycle. We're not totally into the physical realm yet, in which they can be reckoned a form of energy, as such be expressed in physical forms. So the only thing that we can measure is the physical form of what's going on. And you can see here on this slide the change of thought to a force for expression. So that force is going to be that mental impulse coming down that's going to be expressed through the cell, and it's a blueprint to building. So you can see this picture that I've given you on this slide. Transformation, in terms of anything that you look at living being, the caterpillar to a butterfly would be an excellent thing. The caterpillar comes along, it builds a cocoon, it climbs inside the cocoon. If you think about the caterpillar, it may know what the butterfly is going to look like, or there may be people that say based on what the caterpillar looks like, they can know what the butterfly is going to look like, but that butterfly could come out looking totally different than that caterpillar that went in. So that caterpillar would be your mental realm, your thought process. It goes into the cocoon, transformation occurs, and then the butterfly comes out of the cocoon. That would be the mental impulse then, taking action and heading out and working on the cell. Page 29, we have Article 59, the seventh step of the normal complete cycle is the mental impulse. Stephenson defines the mental impulse as a unit of mental force for a specific tissue cell for a specific occasion, a special message to a tissue cell for the present instant. It differs from a universal force in that it is constructive and is for a particular moment and need of coordination, while universal forces are not constructive in particular, are for all moments generally, and are too general to be coordinative. Okay, so this mental impulse we're getting now into where this is going to be adaptations that the body is going to be performing and doing to counteract those universal forces. The mental impulse is being sent to the tissue cell to adapt that cell, to change that cell, to do whatever that cell needs to be most productive, most beneficial for the body as a whole, and also to keep that cell as healthy and lively as it possibly can be. I think one of the things to look at here, it talks about universal forces are not constructive in particular, are more general, and are too general to be coordinative. So we know that universal forces are destructive. Universal laws would say that everything would be on a level plane, there would be no change, everything would be flattened out, level, no adaptation, no anything occurring. We would have just generalized everything, where our innate intelligence is going to be working using these mental impulses to adapt our body, change, help it grow, develop, and thrive the best that it possibly can be. When we look at the first paragraph here, I think one thing that's huge, this should have been bolded when he wrote this, it's not fully understood what mental impulses are. This was in 1927 that this was developed, and still today here almost, we're almost looking at 100 years later, 90 years later, we still don't fully understand what mental impulses are, okay? He talks later on here about how that's not necessarily bad or looking bad for chiropractic or chiropractors, as engineers and electricians do not know what electricity is, yet they know its laws and manifestations and are able to make practical applications of its knowledge. So we know that mental impulses are adaptations that are sent from our innate intelligence down to the tissue cell to adapt that cell for it to grow and thrive. We just don't necessarily fully understand what that mental impulse is, what that message is. A lot of times when I'm trying to explain it to people, I try to make it in relation to a landline phone line. So if you guys have still anyone uses a landline in your office where people would call in, you would have the phone company come in or an electrician come in, and if they were going to test to see if that phone line is working the way it should, they're going to pull out a voltmeter or an ohm meter. They're going to check the continuity of the wires that are coming into the office. They're going to check them at the phone box out maybe on the street or somewhere down the street from your office or your home. But they don't have any way to physically check the messages that would be coming through that phone line, which would be your conversation, much like you're listening to me right now. I'm talking into a microphone with a headset that's traveling through the wire, and the only way that I have to know that these messages are getting to where they're supposed to be is to go back and play that information later on to see if those messages had gotten there. These mental impulses would be like those messages running through that phone line and that phone system. Chiropractors know the manifestations of the mental impulses, looking at how they work at the body and what they're doing, but that we don't necessarily fully understand what those mental impulses are. Whatever the force is, they know that they just have to name a unit of it, which is the mental impulse, much as the justification of electricians have named a unit of electrical current an ampere, or ampere, an amp, as we would say here in the United States. Okay, so we don't necessarily have to fully, completely understand it. We've given it a name, the mental impulse, and we know how it's going to act on the body and what it's going to do in terms of those tissues adapting and that tissue cell trying to thrive and survive and be the best that it possibly can. He states here in the last paragraph on this page, each tissue cell requires specific impulses at every given moment. So we know trillions of cells inside the body. There's trillions of mental impulses going to all of these different cells at every given moment, trying to adapt the body for the best change that it possibly can. It says here in the next sentence, there are new ones for every single adaptive change that is needed. Impulses are only good for the moment for which they are created. And then in bold print here, it says they cannot be stored or dammed back. If this were possible, the mental impulses would immediately become useless. So we know that unless the cell totally dies, it's going to be continuing to adapt. They can't be stored up or dammed back. That's going to be stating that, a lot of people use the analogy like the foot on the garden hose, where that water is going to be dammed back. Those mental impulses are still getting there. As you look through the normal complete cycle and you get into the abnormal complete cycle, you're going to see that the problem is actually going to occur not with the mental impulse, but actually with the tissue cell itself. So the tissue cell is going to be what starts to break down, because as there's these moments in time going from these mental impulses going up to the innate intelligence, being processed and coming back down, that tissue cell is going to start to break down, even though the innate intelligence is going to be trying to adapt it the best it possibly can. As you know through your studies in the ACP program, the problem is going to be with the matter, not necessarily the mental impulse or the innate intelligence of the body. Those are always going to be 100%. And here on page 30 we have Article 60, the 8th step of the normal complete cycle, which is going to be propulsion. Propulsion, Stephenson defines as the sending or the starting of the mental impulse, dispatching the message to the right tissue cell, the effort which causes the mental impulse to go to the tissue cell. Okay, he defines from Webster's propel as to impel forward or onward by applied force. In the next sentence there, mental force is a form of energy. Forms of energy, as studied in physics, show a decided expenditure of effort somewhere. So you can see here this picture I've put of like a turbine jet engine. All of us have probably seen a space shuttle take off, or we've been on an airplane, and that engine is running and it's sitting there and it has all this horsepower stored up inside of it, but until it's actually put to use, the horsepower of that engine is sitting there just waiting for that action to do something. And then as you're giving it more fuel and that horsepower is allowed to be unleashed, action starts to occur and the plane or that space shuttle starts to move. So that horsepower that is in that engine is going to be much like the propulsion step of this normal complete cycle. Our innate intelligence has all this horsepower ready to fire these mental impulses down, or like a slingshot, you draw the slingshot back, or if you do any hunting and you use a bow and arrow, you draw the bow back, you're holding that bow. It's you holding that bow, and then the release of your finger, that release of your finger is going to be the propulsion where it's going to fire that arrow or that rock or stone or whatever it is that you're going to be firing out of that thing forward and allow it to travel to its destination where it needs to get to. He talks later in this paragraph, it's either given off by these energies or by something else and giving them origin. He goes on to talk about generators having horsepower that propel the current to where they need to go. So like here in South Carolina, a lot of our power is generated by power plants that use water. They dam up and they use hydro conversion, things like that, where they generate all of this power and then they propel it out everywhere to where it needs to go. I practiced in Illinois for 7 years, and up there we use nuclear energy. So they have all of these power plants that are nuclear reactors that are generating all of this electricity, and then it's fired out and sent out through all the power lines to all the homes for us to be able to use as we need to see fit. One of the last sentences here on this page, he talks about the departure of the mental impulse from the brain cell is accompanied by some kind of effort, is it not? So again, horsepower in an engine would be a great example of propulsion. Action, it's the action of leaving the brain cell and traveling to and down through the efferent nerve, which you're going to get into in your next few pages here. It requires effort, so there's metabolism, energy required, which is why we need to fuel the body the way that we do, and it's an initiation step here, moving from that mental impulse down to the tissue cell. So when we're focused on this propulsion step here, a lot of this would be like you putting effort or energy into your office. So we used the blueprint of the office earlier in these slides. The energy that you put into your office, and there's energy exchanged with everybody that comes in. You only have so much energy on a given day that you can use. You need to focus that energy and channel it into all the positive things that you need to really do. That energy, that effort that you're going to be putting out, how hard you work, is going to be the propulsion of what happens with your practice. And I think that's one easy way to try to look at this step. Here I've included a picture of the normal complete cycle. Again, I don't want to get too far into this because someone else is going to be covering this material, but these 5 pages here focus on the steps 5 through 8 of the normal complete cycle where we were looking at, and one of the things that I think is key to look at is these are basically preparatory steps. We're preparing and maybe transformational steps, which is again one of the things that the components that we looked at there, step 6 of the normal complete cycle. We're going from the mental realm into the physical realm where things are going to be moving into that efferent nerve. Okay, then you're going to be having the physical transmission, which you'll get down to the tissue cell and then come back on the other side. Someone else is going to be working in, or maybe you'll be working as a group on that information with that. But I just wanted to include this so you can kind of see and start to break down where you're at in this cycle and how things are going to be working. And last, before I leave you here, I've included a slide here where I would like to see you guys do some further work and some further study. And one of the things that I was looking at, much like some of the scenarios that I gave you here in these slides, is how can you take these concepts, these steps that we're talking about of this normal complete cycle, and introduce that into your practice and in your educational material that you give your practice members or your patients, whatever you call them, even with your staff, so that they can better understand and communicate this to the people that are going to be coming into your office to help you fulfill that mission or that purpose, whatever it is, that however many people it is that you want to serve in terms of your practice. Are people, another thing to look at, are people capable of relating metaphysical concepts without the use of religious connotations? That would be something maybe you guys could do as a group discussion. And why is understanding the steps of the normal complete cycle important for practice and our profession? I think a lot of the people in chiropractic right now don't really understand the normal complete cycle or our philosophy, which is why, at least in the United States here, a lot of people struggle understanding chiropractic, especially from a public perspective. Some of my colleagues here at the school just went to a recent research symposium, and they were talking at that symposium about how subluxation is a historical term and we need to move forward with our thinking and our level of expectation and lose the subluxation and move into something like non-allopathic spinal lesions, or just focus on neuromusculoskeletal complaints, and then if people aren't better in 6 visits, you need to refer them out. And philosophically, that's not really our goal or objective with not really, it isn't our goal or objective of chiropractic. The goal is for a person to be clear, to have a fully functioning and clear nervous system, and their body to express health the best that it possibly can be. So I'd like to see you guys as a group get together and look at some of these questions here and discuss them and see what kind of concepts you come up with. And then if you wanted to shoot me an email back, again, the email is rbrescia@sherman.edu. I'd love to see what kind of information you guys come up with and what kind of game plans you have that you can use moving forward to help you. It's been great. I've really enjoyed being involved with you guys. Hopefully I get to meet some of you if you ever come to a Lyceum or IRAPS here, or I ever get the opportunity to get out to Europe to talk and communicate with you guys. I would love to hang out and see where you're at and where you've been. I've read some of your papers, so I really appreciate this opportunity of being able to work with you guys, and I hope this furthers your understanding. Take care, and keep on keeping on, as BJ would say.